Hello Year 10, we're going to do some analysis of London today. This is one of our favourite poems. All the English department really like this poem, and as such there's so much we could say about it. So what I'll do is I'll try and just keep to the main things that you need to know about the poem and try not to get too carried away. But when we come to revise the poem when we're back in school, I'm sure your teachers will add different things to what I'm going to say today. So hopefully you've copied down a few of the quotations and just follow along and make notes. I'm not going to write down all of my notes on the paper, so if you want to jot down anything that I say but don't write down, if you want to extend yourself a bit further, you can do. Okay, so let's get started then. So immediately at the beginning of this poem, there is the idea that of control that is immediately presented through the repetition of this word, chartered, and I've asked you to write that one down already. We've got chartered streets and we've got the chartered Thames does flow. I wander through each chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow. And as you'll know from your work yesterday, a charter is where previously, I suppose, public land was sold off. And Blake took exception to that because he was a naturalist, and he felt that by selling off things that had previously been very public, that you were limiting people, restricting people from going where they wanted to go, and therefore controlling people. So this repetition of the word chartered immediately establishes the fact that society and government were now controlling the land. Okay, so this is a criticism of human control. So I'm going to write down this repetition, and we're going to talk about how this is a criticism of human power and control, because obviously we're always trying to relate back to power when we're talking about poetry, because that's the cluster that we're looking at. Criticism of power and control. The word chartered is a really important word in the poem, actually. I won't go into too much detail, but it wasn't really in the original version of Blake's poem. Originally that word, he replaced this word. The word was dirty. I wander through each dirty street near where the dirty Thames does flow. And he changed it to chartered, and that really shows a change in Blake's ideas and how he wanted to really get the idea of control across, not just the effects of what industrialisation was like in London. He didn't just want to say it's dirty. He wanted to say, actually, yes, it's dirty, but it's also restricted and controlled. So I'm going to put down those words there as well. So the fact that it's chartered shows that it is the people that it's restricted, and it is they're being controlled. We've also already said that, haven't we? So I'll just link it to that. The interesting part about this is, yes, it's a chartered street, a street that's been privately owned and privately sold. But the idea of the Thames being chartered, near where the chartered Thames does flow, is kind of ironic, really, because you can't really control a river particularly. But those in power are trying to control everything, even things that are completely natural, like the Thames. So I'm going to give you a little bit more information now about, perhaps if you are looking for a 7 upgrade, you might want to prick your ears up. You can look at the idea of chartered as a metaphor as well. So the things I'm going to tell you now are a little bit more complex. It can be seen as a metaphor because this river the River Thames runs through the whole of London. Okay, so this suggests that the fact that it's chartered, that means it's controlled, and it's flowing all the way through London, shows that this control and this restriction is flowing all the way through London, and it's affecting everything. Okay, so I'm going to link that to the word flow. So this control is flowing Yes, we have to move my camera across. Through the whole of London, and therefore that's affecting everything. Can we go on to look at the effects in a moment as well? So this affects everybody that he meets. Okay, so that's the first one, the repetition of the word chartered. There's lots of repetition in the poem. So the repetition we're going to look at next is the repetition of the word mark and marks. Okay, and he says, he walks through, I wander through the chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow, and I mark in every face I meet marks of weakness and marks of woe. This first mark here, this means I notice in every face. So I'm just going to write that down so you remember what that means. Oh dear, I'm not going to have much room, am I? Going to go this way. This sort of mark means to notice. I notice in every face I see, in every face I meet, marks of weakness and marks of woe. And this sort of mark is a different sort of mark. That's a sign of weakness and a sign of woe. I can see signs of weakness all over them, and I can see signs of sadness, which is what woe means. So we've got these very negative words here. And this could, he says it's in every face he sees. So this really could be hyperbole. He might not see it in every face. It's very, very unlikely that he would see this in every face he sees, but it's perpetuating how he feels about the place. And so he feels, his perception of it is he's so angry that there's so much poverty around, that's all he sees. He sees it everywhere. So I'm going to put down that this mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe, could be seen as hyperbole, which means hyperbole. There you go. My camera needs to be a bit higher. Hyperbole means exaggeration. So he could be exaggerating what he's seeing because that's his perception, because he's so angry, he sees it everywhere. I hope you can see this when I move my arm. Okey-dokey. So the first stanza, the first quatrain of the poem really begins to show his anger and his criticism that the industrialisation and the chartering of the streets and the Thames, and all of those things is having a massive effect on people. And the reason for that is because of this big divide between the rich and the poor are really struggling within this society. And he's very critical of that. And he also then goes on to describe these people who he's seeing in the street, who have marks of weakness and marks of woe. And he did, again, the hyperbole continues. He describes it in every cry of every man, every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. So we're just going to look at the repetition of every, first of all, and it is very similar to point to the one we've just looked at. Okay, so we've got in every cry, in every infant's tear, in every voice. You'll notice that each of these lines begin in the same way. Each phrase begins in the same way, and that technique we call anaphora, or some people call it anaphora. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce it. We'll say anaphora, but this is how you write it anyway. Okay. So in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band. So the purpose of using anaphora, using the same start to the sentence, in every, that builds in its intensity and really shows that every child and every voice is feeling this. So this is building the intensity. and showing the size of the problem according to Blake. So this really is the effect on people that industrialisation has had, okay? And this really builds now, so we're building in every cry of every man, every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, to the final line of the stanza. And obviously you'll talk a little bit more about structure when you go into it again. I'm not going to say too much, I'm not going to give too much away. But then we build to this wonderful metaphor, and it's one of the most important metaphors in the poem, and one you could write all day about, and I'm sure your teachers will add lots and lots of points to what I'm about to say here. So first of all, I'll just explain what some of the words mean in this line, the mind-forged manacles. So manacles are handcuffs, and therefore are associated with restriction and being confined, much like the word chartered earlier in the poem. So manacles are about restriction, they're about being handcuffed and restricted, but they are mind forged, so they're made in the mind. To be forged, to forge something, is an industrialized kind of word, and it means to make something. And so he hears, in every single person, he hears mind forged manacles, he hears handcuffs of the mind. Okay, so perhaps first of all, we need to say that this is a metaphor. The fact that these manacles are mind forged, these handcuffs are mind made, perhaps might suggest a couple of things. So I'm only going to go through a couple, and then, as I said before, your teachers might add as we revise the poem. It could suggest that because society has been so controlled by the government, and later we find out the church and the monarchy, perhaps he is suggesting that people's freedom of thought has been taken away. Their thoughts have been shackled, they've been manacled. Okay, so perhaps he is saying that freedom of thought has been taken away. So you might think, well, how can you take somebody's thoughts away from them? That's a very profound thing to think. It's your mind is yours, you can think what you want to think. But I suppose if you think about society and you think about the impact that society and people around you might have, it might suggest that the ideas and the outlooks that are being imposed upon them are having such an effect from those in power that it's affecting their thought process as well, and they're restricting themselves. They're in their heads, they're being restricted. So I would say as well, to add to this idea, you might say something like their ideas are being imposed upon them by those in power. A bit like in checking out my history, the way that what we learn in school, for example, that's controlled by somebody, and so that then therefore will have an effect on how you view the world. So the things around you are really important about how your thoughts are, and about yourself and about others around you. And Blake is saying that actually our minds are being restricted and manacled by the views of people around, okay, and what they're being told. There are other interpretations of that as well. Okay, so the first two stanzas have been about what he has heard as he's been walking around London, and then the third stanza we start to see real criticism of those in power, and he's quite specific about who he's criticising. And so I'll put that here, because quite a few notes on this. Critical of those in power. Now this is one of my favourite bits of the poem. I love this bit. So we have how the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. I won't talk to you about anything structural, we'll do that separately, so we're not going to talk about the rhyme or anything there, although we will later. But you need to know a little bit about the job of chimney sweeps. So the chimney sweeper, the job of the chimney sweeper usually fell to orphans in the care of the church. So orphan children were put in the care of the church. The church then allowed them, encouraged them, sold them to go and be chimney sweepers. And here Blake is really critical of the church for doing that. We've got the chimney sweeper's cry, every blackening church appalls. So I'll explain what some of those words mean in a second. This is the quotation I asked you to write down, every blackening church appalls. And on a literal level, that just means that the church is, the physical church is blackening because of the smoke caused by industrialisation. That's the literal meaning of it. But the metaphorical meaning, when you link it to the chimney sweeps and the impact the church had on those orphan children, is quite profound and really interesting. So this metaphor here is Blake's criticism of the church. I'm going to write it a bit further down here. Metaphor, Blake's, oh, the desk isn't quite big enough, Blake's, I'm using my daughter's desk and it's quite small, so let's move that down. Blake's criticism of the church. Okay, so I need to tell you a little bit about this. He uses, in order to make this metaphor, let me just move that cable. In order to create this metaphor, he uses colour imagery, and the colour imagery here is that the black of the church, the blackening of the church, is suggesting that the church is corrupt, the church is evil. So this imagery is suggesting the church is corrupt. Every blackening church appalls. And the reason they're corrupt and the reason they're evil is because their failure to help, their failure to do something good for these orphan children, their failure to intervene and change something. So we'll put that down. The church is meant to be something very good. Now we know Blake was critical of the church. He was religious. He believed in God, but he wasn't a religious. But he didn't believe in organised religion. He was very anti-church, and so you can the voice of that really comes through in this. The interesting thing is the word appalls, and in this sense, this means like to go pale. So the blackening church appalls, and that kind of suggests, if you go pale, it kind of suggests a sense of shame and like you've gone white, you know, when you like feel like really guilty about something. And perhaps Blake is there making a reference to, well, he's basically shaming the church for not having more action and getting into it more and helping. He thinks the church should be something pure and good and innocent, but actually it's not helping, and we know that because the chimney sweepers cry. Okay, we've got another sound word there. Okay. Again, one of my favourite bits. We could go on about that forever, but I'm not going to say any more. Another criticism he has is of the monarchy, and we know that through the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. The hapless soldier means the unfortunate soldier, which is not a word that you would associate with a soldier. Soldiers are usually described as brave, strong, and here we've got quite what's the word really? They're feeling well, teamed with the word sigh, unfortunate and sighing. It's not very assertive, is it? It suggests that they are lacking in power and lacking in any spirit. There's nothing they can do about it. It almost feels like they're resigned to what they have to do. So this shows how powerless the soldiers are, and it is the palace that is marked by the bloodshed of all the battles they have to go to. It's them that's to blame for all of the deaths. It's literally running down the palace walls. I mean, it isn't literally, sorry, metaphorically it's running down palace walls as if they've got blood on their hands. However, so I should say that first of all, I should write something down about that. So we'll write down that the soldiers here are presented as powerless. And that's through the words hapless and sigh. And the fact that it's running down palace walls, the blood, suggests that they are to blame for the deaths. It's a metaphor for blame. And he's being critical again, critical of the monarchy. Oh, my handwriting is getting even more scrawly as we go along. Oh gosh, let's move that down there. Okay, good. However, we also need to just touch on, and your teachers will go into more detail about this, the French Revolution here. You have had a little bit about that in the context lesson, I think. I remember putting that in. So this could also be linked to the French Revolution, the hapless soldier sigh runs in blood down palace walls, where obviously there was lots and lots of bloodshed in France. At one point Blake was a supporter of this, but so perhaps he could be suggesting that if we don't make a difference, if we don't make a change, there will be in the future blood running down the palace walls, because the same thing might happen in Britain. So if the monarchy don't make a change, if the people in power don't make a change, then there will be a revolution, and a similar thing may happen in that our monarchy may also be executed. Wow, that's cool, hey? So this could be Blake's warning that a similar revolution may happen to the French Revolution, where the monarchy were executed. Cool. Right, so that only leaves the final stanza, and again I'm not going to go massively into too much detail about this, but I asked you to copy down some of the key vocabulary from this stanza. And we're going to look at a real destructive semantic field. A semantic field is a group of words that link together in one way, and the way they link here is sort of aggression and destruction. So let me just highlight some of those words that are important. We've got we've got the word curse, blasts, blights, plagues. Okay. So the final stanza of the poem, again, so the previous one was about who's responsible and who am I being critical of, and this one is back again to the effects, but this is at midnight, so we're at a different setting now. So this is nighttime, and the nighttime world in London, as according to Blake, in his image is an image of indecency and corruption, so it sounds a bit immoral. And this is the effect of the industrialisation, and because of the difference between the rich and the poor, in the evening we start to see the effect of that, and there's the massive divide. So firstly, we can see that through the harlot. So we've got the youthful harlot's curse, and it's interesting that she's youthful. A harlot is a prostitute, and she's a young prostitute. So the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear. This is a really, really stark image, a real sad image. I find this bit really, really sad. The harlot's blasting the newborn is the prostitute is, basically Blake's describing the sound of her shouting at an innocent baby. So the effect is having an effect on the newborn as well as people who are a bit older. So the next generation is also going to be affected. But the harlot's curse, this young harlot, I think we need to remember first of all though that prostitution isn't a life that people choose particularly. It's something they resort to when they have nothing. So this harlot, this prostitute, is a symbol of the poverty in London at the time. In fact, I'll write that down, harlot. Okay, and the effect of that poverty. So what was I going to say? Yes, so the harlot's curse. Now, the harlot's curse could mean a couple of things. It could mean the curse of the terrible life she's leading, the terrible life experiences she may have, but it also, perhaps links better to the end of the poem, might also be about the sexual diseases that prostitutes contracted and therefore spread. There wouldn't have been the protection that there is today. So this also links to the idea that how the youthful harlot's cursed, blah blah blah, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. So her curse, her sexual diseases, plague marriage, okay, and put it to bed and make it die. Now, the sexual diseases, so I'm going to put that down as a sexual disease. The sexual diseases that she has are, sorry, my daughter's just popped in again. Off you go, please, Florence. Please, off you go. That wasn't really the right time, was it? What was I going to say? Sexual diseases. The harlot's curse, the sexual disease, is described as something that plagues marriage. Now, a plague is something that's a widespread disease. A plague is something that is has enormous implications. So the fact that this plagues marriage shows just how widespread the problem is, how rife prostitution is. So this is I'm running out of space now, sorry. rife means it's like everywhere, and so so the sexual disease is rife and prostitution is rife everywhere, and so it really shows the enormity of the problem in London as far as Blake sees it. He sees that this is very, very widespread, and it completely destroys marriages. We see this in the final oxymoron of the poem. A very, very stark, negative image to end on. A marriage hearse. A hearse is something that takes you away when you've died. So can you just jot down that this is an oxymoron? And basically the prostitution is completely destroying the institution of marriage. Gosh, I've gone on a bit, haven't I? Sorry. Anybody in my class will know that that happens quite a lot. So that's the main level, destroying the institution of marriage. But if you think about it, now this is really an extension point, and it is my last point. If you look at the prostitute, the harlot, as a symbol of the effect that industrialisation and the chartering and the control and the power of the rich, if you look at her as a symbol of the effect of all of that, and marriage as a symbol of the institution and of family, Blake is really suggesting that civilization and family and morality and all those things in life that we have known is basically being destroyed through this oxymoron, marriage hearse. So everything is now being destroyed and is dead, relating to the hearse, something we can't go back from. So it's a really stark criticism, and Blake's voice is, I find it quite angry in this poem. He's a real sense of injustice that he is describing. I hope I haven't gone on too much, and I hope you've enjoyed that poem. And like I said, if it does take several readings to understand these poems, so if there's anything that you don't understand, you can get in touch with your teachers, or just wait until we're ready to revise. But when we do revise, it will become more and more clear as we go along. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day.